everyone, it's Maddie
and V, and today we're doing a wrap up of the books we read at the end of the summer.
We have 10 books to talk about, so let's get to it. My most recent read is From Twinkle with Love by Sandia Menon, and I read When Dimple Met Rishi last year, but it really disappointed me because I went in with such high expectations of it being this STEM female protagonist, and that's not what I got. So with this one, I went in blind. I didn't read the blurb, I just picked it up from the library, and I wasn't even sure that I was going to read it, but I thought I'm going to give this author another chance, and thank goodness I did, because I liked this book a lot more than her first. So this is all about Twinkle, who wants to become a filmmaker, and so she decides to cast all of her friends in a gender-bent version of Dracula. She's in love with the most popular boy in school, but not necessarily because she actually likes him, but because she thinks of him as a vehicle to make herself popular. And so already you can kind of tell that she's going to be an unlikable character because she's so fixated on being popular in high school. The most popular boy has a twin brother called Sahil, who has been interested in Twinkle since they were 11 years old, and so they get to work together on the film project. It's obvious that they should be together because they have so much in common and a real chemistry when they're together, but Twinkle also has a secret admirer that's sending her emails, and she assumes that it's Sahil's brother Neil. This is probably one of the most predictable elements of the plot because I knew who the secret admirer was from a mile off, but it wouldn't be a romantic comedy without some complications getting in the way of the real romance. Twinkle is also having some trouble with her best friend Maddie. She has different friends to Twinkle in school and acts differently, and so they're having to deal with their friendship kind of growing and changing from when they were young and in each other's pockets all the time. As I said, by the end, Twinkle comes to these revelations about her personality and how it's not necessarily Maddie's fault that she's changing, it's Twinkle herself. The ending disappointed me because it felt like Twinkle was just getting everything she wanted, even if it wasn't 100% deserved, because even though I said that she's aware she was a bad person, that didn't stop her from repeatedly being horrible to a few people, and so she was learning a lesson but then not learning it at the same time, and so when she gets all of her desires by the end, it doesn't actually feel that satisfying.
The first book I have to talk about is Neverworld Wake by Marisha Pessl, and honestly I picked this up because the main character's name was B, spelt with 2 E's just like me. And from such random expectations I ended up really loving it, so I'm gonna give it 4 stars straight off the bat. B hasn't spoken to her friends since her boyfriend's death, and then they all get together for a reunion. They get back from their reunion and all stay in a house, and then they get a mysterious visitor who tells them that they're all dead. They quickly realise that they are trapped in the Neverworld Wake, which is sort of like Groundhog Day, but the boundaries are very different. They're stuck there until they vote on which one of them deserves to live, and it has to be a consensus. I would say that this book is split up into 3 parts. Even though it does have its own divisions, you can tell that like it's a 3-act structure, and Act 1 is them coming to terms with their surroundings and learning more about each other after the time that they have spent apart. But B is quite reclusive, so she is our vehicle into learning where all of the other characters go in their time, since obviously they don't come to a consensus straight away. The next part is when all of the characters come together and decide that they need to work out what happened to Jim, B's ex-boyfriend. This leads to a series of shocking discoveries, and I was genuinely thrilled with each and every one of them. Even though I really enjoyed the plot and the story as a whole and the characters themselves, the writing wasn't quite for me, but I just had to overlook that because I was so engaged. Groundhog Day and An Impossible Choice are 2 of my buzzwords, so this ended up being basically the perfect read for me.
Next I have Easy Prey by Catherine Lowe, which was one of the arcs that we picked up at Yelk. This is a thriller with 3 perspectives. Jenna, who was caught in a sexting scandal and so wants revenge. Mouse, Jenna's best friend and geek, who is really important in making this revenge happen. And Drew, who is a jock and essentially just wants in on the action. The 3 of them get together and decide that they're going to catfish one of their teachers because she is someone that didn't want justice for Jenna and was slut-shaming her when it all came out. The motive for Jenna is really strong, but I didn't see the motives for the other boys. It genuinely felt that they were interested in just sharing pornography for no other reason than their own pleasure, and that was kind of disgusting to read about. Drew's perspective throughout the book was my least favourite because of this, and he had no moral compass. Mouse was the much more likeable male character, but he was equally culpable as Drew, and so even though he wasn't as interested as Drew in using this for his own gain, it was still terrible and he deserved what he got. Jenna was the most interesting character, particularly by the end, because there's a complete 180 in her character motivation, and I really enjoyed that. I just wished that the twist had happened sooner. It's an interesting perspective on sexting scandals, but I just don't think that it finds its moral high ground until the very end, and by then you're like, wow, I really wish that this book was only told from Jenna's perspective. So as thrillers go, I'd say that it was entertaining, quite a slow burn, but by the end you look back at the whole thing and realise that it's much better than you thought it would be.
Next I have That's Not What Happened by Cody Keplinger, an arc that I won at Yalc. Because of the title and the back, which says 6 survived to tell the story but who knows the truth, I was expecting a very different book to what I actually got. I thought this was going to be a thriller. It's set after a school shooting, and our narrator, Leanne's best friend, died during the shooting. So she's coming to terms with how she feels about it. It's the 1-year anniversary, and all 6 survivors are coming together to work out how they felt about it. Leanne, however, is fed up with how the media are spinning the story, which puts Sarah as a martyr, the girl with the cross necklace, because she knows that it wasn't hers. Leanne wants to tell the truth, but everyone else wants it to stay the same. The only thing that kept me reading was that Leanne came out to herself as asexual, and she was starting to think about whether she should tell those around her, because she does have a love interest, and I was very anxious throughout the whole thing for if she was going to tell him and how that conversation would go down, because that has to be handled sensitively, and I could very easily dislike the love interest depending on what his response was going to be. So Leanne had a conversation to the reader about what asexuality meant to her, and then she talked to her love interest about it. When she told someone else, her views about asexuality did fluctuate. She wasn't entirely sure whether sex was something she wanted to have at all. When she's talking to her love interest, I think probably in reassurance she's saying that she would love to find someone that she could have sex with someday, but then in her own internal monologue she was saying that sex was never something she wanted to have. So I feel like that is actually a very complicated issue that could have been unpacked a little bit more but wasn't, especially because it is super important to show asexuals entering into relationships. And she did also, I should mention, set the boundaries for physical intimacy, which made me smile so much too.
Then we've got Second Best Friend by Non Pratt, which is a book both me and Bea read before Yalc, and we really loved it. And of course, why wouldn't we? We were really anticipating this from Non Pratt. She's one of our favourite authors, and her last Barrington Stoke title, Unboxed, was one of our favourites of the year. This is all about Jade, who's living in the shadow of her best friend Becky, who is academically gifted, quite popular, and she wants to go after a student government position. But Jade also puts herself in the ring, and so suddenly these BFFs are pitted against each other for the role. Their friendship has been slowly unravelling before the book begins, but this you really get to see the catastrophe that happens that really pulls them apart. The focus on this is definitely about popularity, about knowing who your friends are, and doing the right thing even if it's difficult. I think this is a super relatable book because everybody at some point has had someone in their lives that they feel second best to, and I think that feeling is perfectly captured in this book. But again, there's so much going on in these characters' lives beyond the pages that it definitely feels like a full-length novel rather than a novella. It was also really interesting to see politics in a secondary school. That's particularly what I liked about Spot the Difference by Juno Dawson, which was her World Book Day book a couple of years ago. So I would really recommend picking this one up if you're looking for a short but detailed look into a friendship.
Then I have Whisper to Me by Nick Lake, and this is 500 pages. It's the story of Cass, who hears a voice after she finds a dismembered foot on the beach. This voice then completely takes over her entire life, and she denies the fact that she knows who that voice belongs to. Whisper to Me is one giant letter from Cass to her love interest. There are no chapter divisions, which is basically my worst nightmare because I love a short chapter. I don't know honestly how I managed to plow through because the first like 200 pages are so uncomfortable. It was really difficult to read all the things that Cass was doing to herself because of the way she was manipulated by the voice. So it is a very heavy read and doesn't match this adorable pastel outside aesthetic at all, but I'm still glad I read it because it was compelling and I desperately needed to know how it was going to all wrap up.
Next I have All These Beautiful Strangers by Elizabeth Clayforth, which was a thriller that I was really anticipating before Yalc. This is split into 3 perspectives, all following members of the Calloway family. Charlie, the teenager who's going to boarding school and wants to find out what happened to her disappearing mother. Grace Calloway, the mother who's gone missing and her parts are told in the past. And Alistair Calloway, the father, who knows more about his wife's disappearance than he's letting on. This is quite a thick book. It was around 500 pages, so there's obviously a lot to unpack with this one, but the pace keeps going, so it didn't take me very long to read. So although this is a YA title, I definitely think there's some adult crossover here, especially because 2 of the point of viewers are adults themselves, and there's a distinct difference in tone. So if that interests you to find this kind of Venn diagram book that fits right in the middle, then I definitely recommend it, even if thriller isn't your genre. I think that Charlie's sections reminded me a lot of The Disreputable History of Frankie Landau Banks by E. Lockhart. That's unavoidable because because of the boarding school and mystery parallels, but I thought it was really well done in this. I enjoyed how we kept getting to dip back into the past and know things, and then see characters in a different light from different perspectives. I think this has also solidified for me as well that I love thrillers that happen retrospectively, where it's someone trying to figure out what happened in the past so all the evidence already exists, rather than trying to find out in the moment, because it just makes it so much more intriguing that you know they're going to put it together. So overall this was a really accomplished book and I gave it 5 stars.
The next book I have to talk about is The Essex Serpent by Sarah Perry, and I picked this up from our local library because it was shortlisted for the Costa Book Award. I read it mostly because I wanted to prepare for the classics that I will be reading in the future, because it is set in the 1800s. It's about a woman called Cora who has recently been made a widow, and she becomes obsessed with the Essex Serpent, which is like a water dragon. There's a whole web of characters and I loved every single one of them. The format of this book also really helped me get through it quickly, as it is set into, and those parts are also separated between months. And there are also pages of letters between Cora and other recipients, which make for a beautiful break after a long section of prose. And I thought that the prose itself was going to be a block for me in getting into this story, but it really wasn't. It was super easy to read and a very quick read too. I think I read it in about 2 days because I was so engrossed. It's not very pacey, but I just liked the overall development of the characters and the story as a whole.
And finally for me, I have Clean by Juno Dawson, which is again one that me and Bea have both read. We switched between the audiobook and the physical book for this one, and it was a great reading experience. This is all about Lexi, who gets put into a rehab centre, and then it's just all of her trials and tribulations there, and also when she's released. It paints an excellent picture of what she was like beforehand, a wild party girl, but also gives the root cause of that personality by explaining her family. So this definitely had more scope than I was expecting it to. The other cast of characters in the rehab centre were great. They each had their own individual things, so it wasn't all drug abuse like Lexi. There were eating disorders and violent tendencies and things like that. Even with the subject matter of drug abuse, this remains an enjoyable book from beginning to end, and you really root for Lexi's character. Even though she is unlikable, there's just something about her personality that really draws you in. There are both quiet and loud moments, so there's really something for everyone in this book. And I think that Juno Dawson's writing style has really evolved with Clean, particularly because she talks about this as such a passion project. You can really see that in the writing. There are so many lines that stuck out to me, so this is one of the first times where I've actually like highlighted things and wanted to remember them. There was a moment where they described adulthood as when you no longer feel safe, and I'd never heard it described like that before, so that kind of blew my mind when I heard it. What was also kind of scary about going into this book was just how hyped it was beforehand, but it completely deserves all of that attention. So if you haven't picked it up yet, then I would really recommend it. It was a 5-star read for both of us, and it's definitely one that I can see myself revisiting because there's so much in this that I probably missed some things, and it's by far my favourite Juno Dawson book to date.
And the last book I have to talk about is Brightly Burning by Alexa Dunn. We are avid watchers of Alexa's channel, so we were really excited to read her story, even though it is sci-fi, which is one of our least favourite genres, if not our least favourite genre overall. However, the elevator pitch for Brightly Burning is Jane Eyre in space, and Jane Eyre was enough for us to sign on. So I can't help but say that we found this book overall disappointing, apart from all the Jane Eyre allusions, which were going to be incredible because we loved Jane Eyre so much anyway, just because a lot of the action and a lot of the driving forces in this book heavily rely upon the source material's originality. Still, the writing and the creation of characters was wonderful, and I liked the developments of the sci-fi. Everything made sense. It was surprising how much Jane Eyre made sense in space, but I think maybe it could have been pushed even further. For example, Stella, who is the stand-in for Jane, is still a governess in Brightly Burning, which is Jane Eyre's profession. However, she is also a mechanic on the ship, and it would honestly just have made more sense if she was a mechanic overall and the whole governess thing was out the window. Next book is set to be Persuasion meets The Bachelor, but from her videos it seems like she's departed quite a lot from that Persuasion touchstone, so that's going to be super interesting to read to compare to how this story was structured. Thank you everyone so much for watching. Don't forget we make bookish videos every week.
You can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at MaddieandB, and those links are always in the description. We'll see you next time.